They called me a fool for planting trees in dead land. But the night the great frost destroyed every farm in the valley, those same people stood outside my gate begging for food. Before we start, subscribe to the channel and join our YouTube family. Don't forget to like the video and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. If you fail, don't come crawling back. My brother's words followed me down the dusty road, while the villagers laughed behind him. I kept walking. The wagon wheels creaked loudly beside me. Inside the wagon were 22 dying fruit trees, and every last dollar I owned tied inside a small cloth bag. One old farmer shouted from the general store porch, "You bought Black Hollow?" The others burst into laughter. "That land kills everything. Haven weeds refused to grow there." I clenched my jaw and kept moving. The sky above the village was grey and heavy. Cold wind pushed against my coat as I headed north, toward the abandoned farmland nobody wanted, Black Hollow. People spoke about the place like it was cursed. Animals avoided it. Farmers refused to touch it. Children dared each other to walk near it after sunset. And somehow, it belonged to me now. By the time I reached the property, evening had already swallowed the hills. The farmhouse looked broken beyond repair. One side of the barn had collapsed. Fence posts leaned sideways like tired old men. And the soil. The soil was nearly black. Not rich brown like healthy farmland. Black like ash after a fire. I stood there silently while wind moved through the empty field. No birds. No insects. Nothing. Just silence. For one terrible moment, fear wrapped around my chest. Had I destroyed my life for this place? The horse pulling the wagon snorted nervously. Even the animals seemed uncomfortable. I swallowed hard. "You already paid for it," I muttered to myself. No turning back now. That first night was brutal. Rain leaked through holes in the roof while freezing wind slipped through cracks in the walls. I slept beside a weak fire wrapped in an old blanket that smelled like dust and smoke. Around midnight, I woke up shivering. The fire had died. The darkness inside the farmhouse felt endless. I sat there staring into the cold shadows and thought about Emma, my wife. 2 years had passed since the fever took her away. 2 years since I buried her beside the church in town. After she died, everything slowly fell apart. The rented farm failed. Debt swallowed what little money I had. People stopped speaking to me with respect. Instead, they looked at me with pity, or worse, disappointment. Then Black Hollow appeared for sale. Cheap, forgotten, broken, just like me. I remembered something Emma once told me while we sat beside the river during autumn. "Sometimes," she whispered, "life hides in places everyone else gives up on." Back then I smiled and kissed her forehead. Now her words haunted me. The next morning I started planting. The ground was hard as stone. Every shovel strike hurt my hands. By noon my back burned with pain. I planted the first apple tree near the eastern fence, then another, then another. Tiny weak saplings standing alone in dead-looking soil. For weeks I worked without stopping. Wake before sunrise. Dig holes. Carry water. Repair fences. Repeat. At night exhaustion crushed me completely. Still, the orchard barely changed. Several trees died within days. Leaves turned brown. Branches cracked from cold winds. One morning I found 3 frozen solid. I stood over them silently. Anger burned inside my chest. "I'm trying," I whispered bitterly. "So why won't you grow?" The wind answered with silence. Days later, my daughter Lily arrived unexpectedly. A neighbor brought her in a wagon from town. The moment she climbed down, she ran toward me, smiling. "Dad!" I hugged her tightly. "What are you doing here?" She shrugged innocently. "I wanted to see the orchard." I almost laughed hearing that word. Orchard. There were barely surviving trees scattered across dead land, but hearing her say it somehow made the place feel real. I brought her inside the farmhouse while soup warmed over the fire. She looked around carefully at the cracked walls and broken furniture. "You really live here?" "Unfortunately." She smiled a little. Then her expression changed. "Why did you buy this place?" Children ask questions adults avoid. I stirred the soup quietly before answering. "Because nobody else wanted it." "That's not the real reason." I looked at her small, serious face and sighed. "After your mother died," I felt lost. Lily lowered her eyes, and this land felt lost too. The room became silent except for the sound of boiling soup. Finally, Lily whispered, "Mom would have liked the trees." Pain hit my chest so hard I nearly stopped breathing. That night, for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow, the farmhouse didn't feel completely empty. The next morning, Lily insisted on helping me water the saplings. The bucket she carried looked too heavy for her small arms. "You don't need to work," I told her. "Yes, I do." She walked carefully beside the smallest tree in the orchard. "If they're alive," she said softly, "someone should take care of them." I smiled despite the exhaustion crushing me. Together we watered every tree, while cold wind moved across the hills. At sunset, Lily stopped beside one weak apple sapling. "This one looks sick." "It probably won't survive winter." She frowned. "Then we help it survive." Children believe impossible things so easily. After she returned to town, the silence of the farm came back. But something inside me had changed. The orchard no longer felt hopeless. It felt unfinished. Weeks passed. Winter grew closer. Snow covered the hills earlier than usual that year. Money disappeared quickly. I sold my watch. Then my tools. Then nearly everything valuable I owned. Still, the orchard struggled. One freezing afternoon, my older brother Jacob rode onto the property. He climbed off his horse and stared around with disbelief. "You actually stayed?" I kept digging without looking at him. "This place looks worse every time I visit." "What do you want?" "Mother's worried about you." I laughed bitterly. "She wasn't worried when everyone mocked me." Jacob sighed heavily. "Daniel, come back before winter kills you." I pointed toward the orchard. "I'm close." "To what, starvation?" Anger flashed through me. "To proving everyone wrong." Jacob shook his head slowly. Then suddenly I noticed something strange near my boots. Tiny steam rising faintly from the soil. I frowned and knelt down. The ground felt warmer than it should have. Not hot, just warm. I dug deeper with my hands. The deeper soil wasn't frozen. That made no sense. Snow covered everything around us. Yet beneath Black Hollow, warmth remained hidden underground. Jacob stared at me like I'd gone insane. "What are you doing?" But I barely heard him. Suddenly I remembered something my father once said years ago. This northern land sits above underground warm springs. Nobody believed him back then. Could he have been right? After Jacob left, I worked harder than ever. I dug trenches across the orchard, studying the soil. The deeper earth always stayed warmer than nearby farms. Not enough to stop winter completely, but enough to protect roots, enough to survive. For the first time since buying Black Hollow, real hope entered my heart. The land wasn't cursed. It was hiding something. Then winter finally arrived. Brutal storms slammed across the hills day after day. Several trees died instantly. Others bent dangerously beneath heavy ice. One terrible night I ran outside during a blizzard, trying to save broken branches. Wind nearly knocked me down. Snow blinded my eyes. I slipped beside the eastern fence and crashed hard into frozen mud. Pain exploded through my shoulder. For several seconds I couldn't move. I lay there staring at the dark, stormy sky while snow covered my coat. And suddenly, I almost gave up. Maybe the villagers were right. Maybe this land would destroy me. Maybe I was too stubborn to admit failure. Then I saw it. One tiny apple tree nearby, bent almost completely sideways by the storm, but not broken, still standing. Still fighting. I slowly pushed myself back onto my feet. "No," I whispered through clenched teeth. "Not yet." By spring, almost half the orchard was gone. Dead, frozen, destroyed. But the surviving trees were stronger now. Tiny green leaves appeared across their branches. Small, fragile, beautiful. I stood alone in the field watching sunlight touch the hills beyond Black Hollow. And for the first time since Emma died, I felt hope again about you. I laughed bitterly. "She wasn't worried when everyone mocked me." Jacob sighed heavily. "Daniel, come back before winter kills you." I pointed toward the orchard. "I'm close." "To what, starvation?" Anger flashed through me. "To proving everyone wrong." Jacob shook his head slowly. Then suddenly I noticed something strange near my boots. Tiny steam rising faintly from the soil. I frowned and knelt down. The ground felt warmer than it should have. Not hot, just warm. I dug deeper with my hands. The deeper soil wasn't frozen. That made no sense. Snow covered everything around us. Yet beneath Black Hollow, warmth remained hidden underground. Jacob stared at me like I'd gone insane. "What are you doing?" But I barely heard him. Suddenly I remembered something my father once said years ago. This northern land sits above underground warm springs. Nobody believed him back then. Could he have been right? After Jacob left, I worked harder than ever. I dug trenches across the orchard, studying the soil. The deeper earth always stayed warmer than nearby farms. Not enough to stop winter completely, but enough to protect roots, enough to survive. For the first time since buying Black Hollow, real hope entered my heart. The land wasn't cursed. It was hiding something. Then winter finally arrived. Brutal storms slammed across the hills day after day. Several trees died instantly. Others bent dangerously beneath heavy ice. One terrible night I ran outside during a blizzard, trying to save broken branches. Wind nearly knocked me down. Snow blinded my eyes. I slipped beside the eastern fence and crashed hard into frozen mud. Pain exploded through my shoulder. For several seconds I couldn't move. I lay there staring at the dark, stormy sky while snow covered my coat. And suddenly, I almost gave up. Maybe the villagers were right. Maybe this land would destroy me. Maybe I was too stubborn to admit failure. Then I saw it. One tiny apple tree nearby, bent almost completely sideways by the storm, but not broken, still standing. Still fighting. I slowly pushed myself back onto my feet. "No," I whispered through clenched teeth. "Not yet." By spring, almost half the orchard was gone. Dead, frozen, destroyed. But the surviving trees were stronger now. Tiny green leaves appeared across their branches. Small, fragile, beautiful. I stood alone in the field watching sunlight touch the hills beyond Black Hollow. And for the first time since Emma died, I felt hope again. Long moment Jacob said nothing. Then quietly he whispered, "We were wrong about this place." Hearing those words felt strange. For years all I wanted was to prove everyone wrong. But now that it happened, it didn't feel as satisfying as I imagined. Maybe because suffering changes a person, or maybe because I understood fear now. The drought became worse. Farmers started losing entire harvests. Animals died from dehydration. Families worried about surviving winter. And suddenly people who once mocked Black Hollow began asking for help. Some wanted water. Others asked how I kept the orchard alive. I helped whenever I could, not because they deserved kindness, but because Emma would have wanted me to. One evening, Lily sat beside me on the farmhouse porch watching sunset colors spread across the hills. "You still think about Mom every day, don't you?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yes, she'd love this orchard." I smiled sadly. She believed in impossible things. Lily looked toward the trees moving gently in warm wind. Maybe impossible things are real sometimes. For the first time in years, peace settled over Black Hollow. Then autumn arrived, and everything changed again. It started with the birds. Hundreds of them appeared suddenly. Then thousands. Every morning they filled the orchard trees with noise and movement. Walter visited again after seeing them. His expression looked troubled. "Birds leave the mountains early only when severe winter comes," he warned. I frowned. But winter's months away, not this year. Something in his voice frightened me. The nights became colder unusually fast. Frost appeared across fields before harvest season even ended. Farmers grew nervous, but most people still believed winter would pass normally. Then one evening, Walter rode to Black Hollow in panic. "The northern lakes already froze," he said breathlessly. Fear tightened inside my chest. "That should not happen so early." "Not ever. A great frost is coming," Walter whispered. The village ignored the warning. Some called him paranoid. Others laughed nervously and changed the subject. But I trusted old farmers. That night I walked alone through the orchard, carrying a lantern. Cold wind moved silently through the trees. I touched the soil beneath the snow-covered grass. Still warm, still alive. Then suddenly I remembered something my father once said years ago. Warm earth protects roots during deadly winters. At the time, I never understood. Now I did. A terrible realization hit me. If the frost became severe enough, Black Hollow might become the only surviving farmland in the valley. Days later, winter arrived like a monster. The temperature collapsed overnight. Wind screamed across the hills. Snow buried roads and fences. Then came the frost. Brutal, merciless. By morning, entire fields across the valley had frozen solid. Crops died instantly. Fruit trees cracked beneath thick ice. Farmers stood outside staring helplessly at ruined land. Some cried openly. Others simply looked broken. Before sunrise, I ran toward my orchard expecting the worst. Snow covered everything. The hills, the fences, the barn roof. But when I reached the first row of trees, I froze. The orchard was still alive. Steam rose faintly from the dark soil beneath the snow. The branches remained green, the fruit untouched. I stared in complete disbelief while cold wind howled around me. Then slowly tears filled my eyes. The land everyone abandoned, the land they laughed at, had survived. And deep inside I realized something terrifying. The great frost had only just begun. The news spread before noon. Black Hollow survived. People arrived at the orchard in silence at first. Farmers, mothers, children wrapped in blankets. Their faces looked pale from fear and cold. I stood near the gate watching them gather beneath falling snow. Nobody laughed anymore. The same men who once mocked me now stared at the orchard like it was a miracle. Standing in the middle of winter, Walter stepped forward slowly. "Every farm in the valley froze last night," he said quietly. My chest tightened. "How bad?" His eyes lowered. "Bad enough that people are already rationing food." Behind him I saw fear on every face. Real fear. The kind people cannot hide. One woman held her son close, while whispering prayers beneath her breath. Another man looked like he hadn't slept all night. Then Jacob walked toward me through the crowd. For once there was no pride left in his eyes, only exhaustion. "We lost everything," he admitted. I looked past him toward the distant hills where frozen farms disappeared beneath white snow. Fields that once fed families now looked like graveyards. And somehow, Black Hollow still breathed. Steam rose softly from beneath the dark soil. Warmth hidden underground protected the orchard roots while the rest of the valley froze solid. The villagers stared at the trees heavy with untouched fruit. Apples, pears, life. One little girl near the front whispered softly, "Are we going to starve?" The question hit harder than winter wind. Nobody answered her, because nobody knew. That evening, I sat alone inside the farmhouse, beside the fire while snowstorms battered the windows. The orchard outside glowed faintly beneath moonlight. Alive, protected, safe. I should have felt victorious. For years I dreamed about proving everyone wrong, but victory felt strange when surrounded by suffering. A knock suddenly echoed through the house. Lily opened the door slowly. 3 villagers stood outside, shivering badly. One of them spoke quietly. "We came to ask for help." The words hung heavily in the air. I looked at their tired faces. Pride had disappeared from all of them. Hunger destroys pride quickly. I stepped aside silently. "Come inside." That night became the beginning of everything changing. The next morning, we started distributing fruit from the orchard. At first I worried there wouldn't be enough, but somehow every tree carried more fruit than expected. It almost felt impossible. Families lined up outside Black Hollow, carrying baskets and sacks. Nobody argued. Nobody pushed. Fear had made everyone humble. Lily spent hours helping organize food near the barn. Her cheeks turned red from cold while she handed apples to children. One little boy grabbed an apple carefully like it was treasure. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," he whispered. Lily looked like she might cry. That winter became brutal beyond imagination. Storm after storm buried the valley, beneath ice and snow. More crops died each week. Livestock froze in barns. The river disappeared beneath thick ice, but Black Hollow endured. The underground warmth beneath the soil protected the orchard again and again. Walter visited often during those weeks. One evening he stood beside me overlooking the trees. "You know what scares me?" he asked quietly. "What?" "If you never bought this land, this valley wouldn't survive winter." I looked across the orchard silently. The thought terrified me too. Because he was right. Then something unexpected happened. The villagers started helping. At first only a few came, then dozens. Men repaired fences without being asked. Women cooked meals for workers. Teenagers carried water and chopped wood. Black Hollow slowly stopped belonging only to me. It became the village's hope. One freezing morning, Jacob arrived before sunrise carrying tools over his shoulder. I looked at him in surprise. "You came to work?" He nodded awkwardly. "I figured you could use help." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Years of distance stood between us like walls. Then quietly he added, "I'm sorry." The words caught me off guard. "For what?" "For laughing at you." Snow crunched beneath his boots as he looked across the orchard. "I thought you were throwing your life away." I stared at the dark soil beneath us. "So did I sometimes." Jacob laughed weakly for the first time in years. That day we worked side by side repairing damaged fencing, while snow fell around us. Slowly, the anger between us began melting away. Weeks later, another brutal frost hit the valley. Colder than the first. The temperature dropped so low that windows cracked overnight. People panicked again. But when morning arrived, Black Hollow still stood untouched. Steam continued rising softly from the earth. The villagers started calling the orchard the warm land. Children ran between the trees, laughing again despite the cold. For the first time all winter, hope returned to the valley. Then came the biggest surprise of all. One afternoon, an elderly woman arrived at the farmhouse carrying a small metal box wrapped carefully in cloth. I recognized her immediately. Mrs. Harper, an old friend of my father. Her hands trembled badly as she handed me the box. "He told me to give you this someday," she whispered. "Who?" "Your father." My heart stopped. My father died years ago. Slowly, I opened the rusted box. Inside were old letters tied together with faded string. My hands shook as I unfolded the first page. It was written in my father's handwriting. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then you stayed." Tears instantly filled my eyes. The room became completely silent. I kept reading. People fear Black Hollow because they only see darkness on the surface. But dark soil holds deep strength. Years ago, I discovered warm springs beneath this land. I wanted to protect it for our family, but nobody believed me. My breathing grew uneven. The letter continued. "One day hard times will come to this valley. When they do, this land will matter more than anyone realizes. If others laugh at you for planting here, let them laugh. Roots grow strongest in silence." I lowered the letter slowly while tears rolled down my face. For years I believed I was fighting alone, but my father believed in this land long before I did. And somehow, he believed in me too. That night, I walked alone through the orchard beneath falling snow. The trees stood tall against the frozen valley. Strong, alive, unbroken. I thought about Emma, about my father, about every moment I nearly gave up. Then Lily appeared beside me quietly. "What did Grandpa write?" I smiled through tears. "He said dark soil hides deep strength." She looked around at the orchard glowing beneath moonlight. I think he was right. Winter slowly began loosening its grip weeks later. The storms became weaker. Snow started melting from rooftops. For the first time in months, birds returned to the valley. And when spring finally arrived, something beautiful happened. The villagers gathered together at Black Hollow, carrying hundreds of young saplings. Apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees. Walter stepped forward smiling. Well, he figured one orchard isn't enough anymore. People laughed softly. Real laughter this time. Warm laughter. Not cruel, not mocking. Together we planted trees across the valley from sunrise until evening. Children ran through the fields carrying buckets of water. Men worked shoulder to shoulder repairing frozen land. Women sang while planting roots into fresh soil. Life returned slowly, but stronger than before. As sunset painted the hills gold, Lily grabbed my hand. "Dad," she whispered, "you saved everyone." I looked across the valley where new orchards now stood beneath spring light. Then I looked down at the dark soil beneath my boots, the same soil they once called cursed, the same land nobody wanted. And finally, after years of pain and loneliness, I understood something. The darkest places are not empty. Sometimes they are simply waiting for someone brave enough to believe in them. I squeezed Lily's hand gently, while warm wind moved through the orchard trees. And for the first time in many years, I smiled without sadness.